Imagine you get fined what basically amounts to a whole year's salary. And it's not for committing a crime or anything. It's just for, like, volunteering to direct traffic outside your local community center.
Yeah, or imagine your teenager being handed a 10-year prison sentence.
Yeah.
Just for attending a public mourning procession.
Right. I mean, usually when we talk about human rights crises or global governance, you kind of expect this flashing red light, a tank rolling down the street.
Exactly. You expect something undeniable where the international community can just point and say, look, there is the crisis.
But today in this deep dive, we are looking at how modern suppression actually works in practice. And it doesn't always look like a dictator on a balcony. Sometimes it looks like a traffic cop or a zoning permit. Just the quiet, invisible machinery of bureaucracy.
It's the architecture of marginalization. We tend to, prefer our geopolitical problems to be loud and easily categorized.
Yeah.
But the reality of how a state or a ruling power systematically erases a minority group is often hidden in plain sight. It's buried in administrative red tape.
Which is exactly the landscape we're mapping out for you today. We've got a really highly detailed stack of source material to unpack. We are analyzing the Shia Rights Watch, or SRW, June 2026 monthly global violations report.
Right, and this covers a very specific 30-day window, from June 1st to July 1st, 2026.
Yeah. And the mission for our deep dive today is to really synthesize this dense cross-border report to get a clear picture of how one specific religious minority group, Shia Muslims, is being marginalized across totally different political environments.
It is a forensic look at just a single month, but it spans 8 different countries. And because we're looking at regions with incredibly complex, overlapping, and frankly, historically loaded conflicts, it's critical that we state our parameters right up front.
Absolutely.
We are analyzing this document to understand the methodologies of state and non-state actors. We are not taking sides. We aren't endorsing any political viewpoints, nor are we validating the ideologies of any governments, security forces, or militant groups mentioned.
Right. Our job today is purely forensic, impartial.
Exactly. Our role is strictly analytical, to impartially report on the factual contents provided by the SRW and break down how these mechanisms of power actually operate.
And to understand the data, you really need to understand where it comes from. The report outlines SRW's methodology. They rely on a network of internal contacts and public sources, like human rights groups active on the ground in these specific countries.
But what's really interesting is their exclusion criteria.
Yes. They purposely omit unverified incidents. The text states that even if they strongly suspect a violation occurred, if there isn't conclusive evidence, they just leave it on the cutting room floor. They also explicitly state their motive is human justice, not political leverage.
And that methodology is exactly why the sheer volume of what is included is so significant. And for you listening, why should you care about a highly specific regional report?
Right.
Because tracking how a vulnerable community is treated isn't just about that specific group. It's a vital, real-time proxy for the health of human rights and the stability of global governance.
If you want to understand a government's institutions, look at how it manages its minorities.
Precisely. But if we just read this report chronologically, it would give anyone intellectual whiplash. You'd be jumping from a bureaucratic fine in the Gulf straight to a militia attack in the Levant. To make sense of it, we need to organize this thematically.
Right, let's look at the patterns. And let's start with the most subtle one. We're talking about state-level actions in Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Egypt. The strategy here isn't overt violence. It's what we might call institutional redlining, the bureaucracy of suppression.
And this is specifically timed around the religious observances of Ashura and the month of Muharram, which, for anyone who might not be familiar with these traditions, it's crucial to understand the context.
It's not just a quiet day of prayer, right?
No, not at all. Ashura and the month of Muharram are profoundly significant, highly public communal mourning periods. They commemorate a historical injustice. So this involves massive public processions, the raising of black mourning banners, large gatherings in community centers, which are known as Husainiyas or matams.
So it's a highly visual expression of identity.
Exactly. It's the most visible time of the year. So when a government targets these specific weeks, they are deliberately targeting the community's highest profile moment of visibility.
And in Bahrain, the strategy was basically a massive preemptive administrative sweep. Like before the month even began, security authorities were summoning Husseini preachers, imposing strict restrictions.
It wasn't just the preachers they went after.
Right. They targeted the operational leadership, the heads of various community centers in places like Diraz and Sanabis, and the judicial outcomes of these summonses are just staggering.
They really are. The report details courts issuing incredibly severe prison sentences. You have an individual named Ali Saeed receiving a 10-year prison sentence alongside a fine of 2,000 Bahraini dinars.
And he wasn't the only one.
No. Several others, like Hilal Ali and Jassim Ali, received the exact same 10-year sentence and 2,000 dinar fine.
I just want to pause on that 2,000 dinar fine because that is financially paralyzing for an average family. But what I find even more unsettling here is the demographic being targeted.
The youth?
Yeah. The report specifically names minors. There's a 14-year-old boy from Al-Maksha, Nasrallah Shaker Al-Mawali, who was arrested. 3 teenagers from Sanabis, aged 15, 16, and 17, were arrested after being interrogated about their participation in these ceremonies.
And 2 other minors received 3-year prison sentences.
Plus, citizens who were just returning from pilgrimages in Iraq were subjected to extensive interrogations and forced to sign security pledges right there at the airport.
Think about the psychological architecture of that approach. By handing a 10-year sentence to a teenager, the state isn't just punishing one person. They're sending a shockwave through the entire neighborhood.
Yeah, it's a message.
Right. They are bankrupting families who try to mount a legal defense, and they are effectively neutralizing the next generation of community leadership before it even gets a chance to form. It's deterrence through devastation, but it's done with a judge's gavel.
Not a military raid. It's an incredibly comprehensive net. And we see a variation of this bureaucratic control in Saudi Arabia too, particularly in the Qatif and Al-Asa regions. Here, the state uses really specific logistical restrictions.
Like prohibiting gatherings at a specific office in Dammam.
Yeah. And they forced Bahraini visitors crossing the causeway to give verbal pledges that they wouldn't attend Husseinias in Qatif. But the mechanics of the bans are what's fascinating to me. They banned live streams of religious programs.
Right.
And they prohibited volunteer organizers from managing traffic outside the community centers. When a state forces a highly public tradition behind closed doors or bans live streams, isn't that just a sophisticated way to culturally invisibilize a community without, drawing the international outcry that violence would?
Absolutely. That detail about the traffic management is actually a perfect example of how boring bureaucracy is weaponized.
How so?
Well, if you ban volunteers from directing traffic outside a massive gathering, you intentionally guarantee severe congestion. That congestion inevitably creates public complaints.
Oh, I see.
Then the state cites those very complaints to declare the gathering a public nuisance. And boom, they have the legal justification to shut down the event entirely.
Wow. It's a completely manufactured crisis.
Exactly. And they also suspended the historic Al-Sharia mourning procession, which is a massive cultural touchstone. They banned mourning processions in public spaces altogether, forcing them indoors.
They even shut down a youth program, right?
Yeah, the El-Shibal al-Husseini program at a mosque in Al-Awamiyah. And in a really stark example of controlling the narrative, Saudi security forces arrested an Iraqi pilgrim just for posting a photograph on social media.
Just a photo.
Yes, of the demolished al-Baqi graves. That was enough for an arrest. We also see swift state-ordered closures in other established states. In Egypt, authorities closed the Imam Hussein Mosque in Cairo right as Muharram began. In Kuwait, the government ordered the immediate closure of the Al-Yasin Husseiniya and suspended all its activities indefinitely.
It's like erasure by 1,000 cuts. A fine, a denied zoning permit, or a traffic violation. That doesn't make the front page of global newspapers. But the cumulative effect is cultural asphyxiation.
Precisely. Bureaucratic suppression is highly effective, but it relies on a specific condition. It requires the legitimacy and stability of a functioning state apparatus. You need an established court system, police forces that follow a chain of command, and a public that generally complies with administrative law.
So we see how a stable government uses paperwork to squeeze a minority, but what happens when the regime isn't established? Like, what happens when a relatively new ruling power uses its authority not just to restrict, but to aggressively dismantle a community's entire institutional framework?
That question takes us directly into the data from Afghanistan, and the shift in methodology here is profound. The Taliban's approach isn't about administrative hurdles or traffic fines. It is about active, physical, institutional erasure.
The speed of what the report documents in Afghanistan over these 30 days is just alarming. They aren't just moving gatherings indoors. It starts right at the street level with the symbols.
Yes. Sources in the SRW report confirm that Taliban members systematically disrupted commemorations in Kabul, Ghazni, and Herat. They were physically tearing down black mourning flags and removing religious banners from storefronts and streets.
And they enforced this aggressively. I mean, Taliban authorities arrested 9 worshippers across multiple mosques in Kabul simply for the act of raising an Ashura flag. 3 more individuals were arrested in Mazar Sharif for the exact same thing.
But the escalation went straight from street symbols to the absolute highest levels of community leadership. The report states that the Taliban Justice Minister, Abdul Hakim Sharai, summoned over 30 prominent Shia community leaders.
And this wasn't just a meeting.
No. He detained them in a special prison operated by the Ministry of Justice, held them from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m., and then forced them to sign written commitments to remove all flags. And they were given an ultimatum to comply by 5 p.m. that exact same day.
That highly compressed timeline, from a morning detention to a 5 p.m. deadline, that's a classic pressure cooker tactic, right? It forces immediate complicity.
Exactly. By making the community leaders themselves responsible for the erasure of their own symbols, the Taliban attempts to fracture the trust between the leadership and the public.
This feels less like localized religious friction and more like a masterclass in consolidating absolute power. Because what really stands out isn't just the targeting of flags, it's the calculated dismantling of the community's infrastructure. They targeted the press and the educational systems simultaneously.
It's just the ultimate hallmark of institutional erasure.
Yeah. Taliban forces raided the Kabul office of Tamadan TV. They suspended its broadcasting, confiscated property, and the station director, Mohammad Ramadi, was detained by order of the Ministry of Justice.
Held in solitary confinement.
Right. Without a warrant and without formal charges. In a separate incident, they arrested a female journalist and her crew just for trying to cover the ceremonies. By taking out a television station and a major seminary, aren't they systematically removing any alternative center of gravity? Any influence that could challenge their state narrative?
Absolutely. To understand the gravity of that, you really have to look at what a local broadcast station means to a marginalized group. It is their voice. It's how they document their own existence. Removing it isolates them completely from the outside world and from each other. And they applied that exact same logic to education. The Taliban ordered the closure of the Khatam al-Nabiyyin seminary in Kabul.
And that isn't just a single classroom. The report describes it as an entire complex. It houses a mosque, a Husseiniya, a massive library, and religious schools for both men and women. They shut the whole ecosystem down.
And tragically, this institutional crackdown inevitably bled into lethal violence. In Herat, Taliban authorities opened fire on individuals protesting these restrictions, killing 2 young men. And when 2 bystanders attempted to document that shooting on their phones, the Taliban arrested them on the spot.
It's a total monopoly over the public square.
It is. Yet, as terrifying as that institutional erasure is, at least in Afghanistan, there is a clear central authority orchestrating it. You can point to the Ministry of Justice or the police forces. There is an address for the oppression.
Right.
Which brings us to the most devastating findings of the entire SRW report, because the violence scales up exponentially in areas where state authority is fractured, where it's complicit, or where it is entirely absent.
This creates a vacuum for extreme lethal violence. We are looking at the data from Syria, Pakistan, and Iraq. And the linguistic shift in the text here it's chilling.
It really is.
The bureaucratic words like summoned, fined, and suspended completely disappear. They are replaced by words like massacred, abducted, assassinated, and demolished.
The rules of bureaucracy and even the structured crackdowns of a new regime like the Taliban no longer apply. This is an extremist vacuum characterized by raw, lethal lawlessness.
Syria represents the most severe concentration of incidents in this 30-day window, and it's crucial to focus on the human reality here, not just list off cities. We aren't talking about political dissidents or armed combatants. We're talking about people being hunted in their daily lives.
Yeah.
The report details a massacre in the Latakia countryside in a village called Manjila. An armed group stormed a private home and killed a family of 5. This is a man named Ghiath Yassin, his pregnant wife, Abir Halima, and their 2 young children who are only 10 and 3 years old.
It's absolute horror.
Yeah.
And the report shows this violence penetrating every single layer of civilian life. You have the targeted assassination of a veterinary student, Laith Ayman Othman, who was critically injured by gunfire right at the University of Hama. You have extremist groups invading student housing in Damascus, literally attacking university students with bladed weapons in their own dorms.
The vulnerability is just total. Armed groups killed farmers who were just gathering firewood in Jabla. They killed a 60-year-old shepherd, Suleiman Abdul Hamid al-Naisafi, who was just walking with his sheep on a rural road in Homs. Shop owners targeted inside their businesses, multiple young women abducted across different provinces, their fates completely unknown.
And they using fire to erase the physical footprint too,
Hmm.
burning down the Imam Hassan Mosque and the historical shrine of Sheikh Nasser al-Hakim.
But here is where I keep getting stuck. Because the perpetrators aren't exclusively shadowy extremist militias operating outside the law, the report meticulously documents massive structural violence carried out by what it explicitly identifies as public security forces.
That's right.
The text notes that public security forces arbitrarily arrested 20 farmers. In another incident, a father was killed when these same state forces raided his home and attempted to assault female members of his family. And then, the most staggering structural event in the entire report, authorities demolished more than 1,000 homes belonging to the residents of Al-Mazrah village in rural Homs.
Yeah, 1,000 homes.
1,000 homes bulldozed, forcing the mass displacement of an entire village, accompanied by physical assaults on the residents. If the state forces are bulldozing 1,000 homes and raiding houses, where does state-sanctioned action end and militia violence begin? Because the outcomes for the victims are exactly the same.
In a fractured state, that functional difference vanishes entirely. In a stable environment, a government holds the monopoly on the legitimate use of force, theoretically to protect its citizens. But in the vacuum we see in Syria, that monopoly breaks down completely.
So the state just becomes another militia.
Exactly. When a state security apparatus is no longer bound by constitutional law, civilian oversight, or international accountability, it basically operates just another heavily armed cartel with official badges. For the family losing their home to a bulldozer or the mother being abducted in the street, the insignia on the uniform of the person doing it is completely irrelevant. The terror is identical. The vacuum allows both non-state militias and state actors to operate with total, devastating impunity.
And this lethal vacuum isn't strictly confined to Syria, though the scale there is the largest. We see the same mechanics crossing borders. In Pakistan, the extremist organization Sipa-e-Sahaba abducted Abbas Hussein Bakhsh directly from his shop in Dera Ismail Khan and brutally murdered him. In Quetta, an armed group assassinated an Afghan Shia businessman.
Even in Iraq, which obviously has a different political landscape, the report notes that civilians who were simply celebrating the holiday of Eid al-Qadir at a resort in Abu Ghraib came under direct gunfire from extremist elements, and their vehicles were set on fire. It paints a picture of a demographic that is forced to constantly calculate the fatal risk of everyday activities.
Wow. So we have covered an immense amount of ground today, looking at a highly dense 30-day window.
We really have. And if we pull back and synthesize the data from this SRW report, we can clearly identify 3 distinct, simultaneous playbooks of suppression being deployed against this specific community over just those 30 days.
Right. First, we explored the bureaucratic strangulation in the Gulf and Egypt. This is the use of institutional redlining zoning, fines, permits, and traffic control to quietly and legally suffocate public religious expression without triggering international alarms.
Second, we saw the aggressive institutional erasure in Afghanistan, a relatively new ruling power utilizing its authority to rapidly dismantle the community's media, educational complexes, and leadership networks in order to consolidate absolute control over the public square.
And third, we analyzed the extremist vacuum in places like Syria and Pakistan. This is where the absence of a stable state or the active complicity of rogue state forces creates a deadly environment of massacres, assassinations, and mass displacement. It is a really stark, meticulously documented picture of the varied threats facing this demographic.
It is profound documentation of how diverse mechanisms of power are wielded against a single group.
It is. And as we wrap up, I want to bring this massive geopolitical analysis back down to the ground. Because, for you listening, it is so easy to read a report full of data points and forget that behind every single statistic is a human being.
Absolutely.
We are talking about 14-year-old boys in Bahrain facing a decade behind bars, veterinary students in Syria trying to finish a degree, a family with a 3-year-old in Latakia, 60-year-old shepherds, shop owners, everyday people who simply wanted to practice their faith, observe a communal tradition, or just go to work without fear.
It reinforces the reality that human rights are not just abstract diplomatic concepts debated at the UN. They are the essential, invisible guardrails that allow daily life to function safely. When those guardrails are removed, whether by a bureaucrat's pen or a malicious rifle, the collapse of normal life is immediate.
Which leaves us with one final, lingering question to mull over on your own. This report meticulously documents the many ways this minority group is suppressed from almost every conceivable angle. But it forces you to wonder about the long-term psychological and cultural aftermath.
The generational impact.
Yeah. Exactly. When a community is systematically pushed out of the public square, whether they are priced out by administrative red tape or violently forced out by armed groups, does it eventually dilute and permanently weaken their cultural identity? Or does forcing a deeply held tradition into the shadows actually forge an unbreakable underground solidarity that ultimately outlasts the very regimes trying to erase it?
History certainly gives us profound examples of both.
It sure does. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.